Our founding fathers here in this country brought about the only true revolution that has ever taken place in man's history. Evolved the idea that you and I have within ourselves the God-given right and the ability to determine our own destiny.
The United States of America, the greatest nation in history, ordained by our founders to be guided by divine providence. But today, we are witnessing the orchestrated disintegration of America. Take a few seconds and take a look around your town, your state, look at your country and your world, and boldly ask, what in the hell is going on?
But freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Welcome to the podcast Project Third Eye Opened, where we dare to question with boldness the events that are unfolding around us that others won't. At the end of the day, it is we the people who will decide the destiny of the nation. Now, introducing your host, Tony L.
Greetings. This is Tony L, and this is going to be a very, very special interview with Mr. Robert Rosen. Rosen. Sorry about that. He is a very interesting gentleman. He has an interesting story about himself, and he is an author. He has written about John Lennon in a book called The Nowhere Man. He has written follow-up books, Brooklyn Memoir, as well as the Beaver story.
Beaver Street.
Beaver Street. I'm sorry. I saw Beaver, and it just my mind went where it shouldn't have went. And that's going to be an interesting story as well. But let's kick things off, Robert. Tell folks about you and why should we care?
Why should we care? I don't know why anybody should care, but if you, my best known book is, like you just said, a John Lennon biography called Nowhere Man, The Final Days of John Lennon. And I wrote that book. That book came out 25 years ago, and it was a bestseller in a lot of different countries, translated into a lot of different languages. And the book came about because after John Lennon was murdered back in 1980, I was given access to his personal diaries that he kept over the last 5 years of his life. And though I'm not allowed to say I've actually quoted from the diaries, what I did was I used the information in his diaries as a roadmap to the truth, that there was a lot of stuff on the public record that matched what was in his diaries. And I took all these bits and fragments on the public record and I put it together in a coherent form that, matched the tone and the feeling and the information that was in his diaries. And what you get is like a journey through Lennon's consciousness over the last 5 years of his life. And the book takes place essentially inside Lennon's head. And, this has kept people talking about it for 25 years. And, that's a miracle that, when the book was published, it changed my life. Before I was like an obscure freelance writer. And after Nowhere Man came out, I was an author with an international bestseller who was traveling around the world talking about it, and that continues to this day. And I'm always happy to talk to anybody who wants to talk to me about Nowhere Man or any of my books.
So tell the folks about you. You say that you are already a journalist. Before Nowhere Man, how'd you get started? Did you go through formal education, or this is a passion of yours?
I had a formal, I went to college. I got a BA and a master's degree in nonfiction writing. I studied with people like Joseph Heller, who wrote Catch 22, and other people who aren't quite that famous, but
Wow.
yeah, were definitely helpful in explaining to me what it means and what it takes to be a writer. I've lived in New York City practically my entire life. I was, born in Brooklyn. I moved to Manhattan in 1975. I'm married to Mary Lynn Mayscott, who is uh, a songwriter and a performer. And let's see, I live in Manhattan. I've been in this apartment where you're looking at me now. I've been here for like 30 some odd years. I live in the Soho neighborhood. And, uh, I spend my time writing now that, after, all these years, I'm obviously not that young anymore, but, after all these years, I'm finally in a position where I could work full time on my books. And,
Wow.
that's what I do every day. I write.
So for people who aspire to be an author and trying to figure out, can I just make money at this? You're a living example that you can.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, the ironic thing is that um 20, 30 years ago, before the internet changed everything, before artificial intelligence changed everything, that
And Amazon.
yeah, it was never easy to make money as a writer, but there were more opportunities, and it's much harder now.
It's
And
harder now, even with Amazon and all the AI, well, AI and this being the internet and people being so easily accessible, you would think?
well, first of all, piracy is a huge, huge
Oh,
problem. That anything, any electronic media, books, movies, video games, TV shows, anything that achieves the least bit of popularity uh, is going to get pirated. And,
oh wow, okay.
obviously, the creators of whatever the thing is, they don't make money off it. So, that's a problem. And the attitude now, seems to be people just don't want to pay for stuff. I mean, and obviously, too, there are still people who do pay, but it's just harder to make money from royalties than it used to be. And in terms of markets, like, magazines, newspapers that pay you a living wage for, doing articles, they're they pay less than they used to 20, 30 years ago,
Mm.
and they're fewer and farther between. I mean, I currently, and my wife too, we both do work for the Village Voice, and it's one of the few paying markets that we have access to. And
Mm.
it didn't used to be like that. Even I was an editor of men's magazines, which is the polite way of saying porn magazines. I edited them for many years, and like over the course from like 1983 to 1999, when Nowhere Man was published. That over the course of that time, what we paid freelance writers and freelance photographers, it just kept going down, 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 because the
So
internet essentially destroyed print magazines, which people paid for.
sure. So why would someone want to be an author today then, other than just the passion?
Uh, yeah, a lot of people write, just because they want to write. I mean, yes, I make money doing it, but making money was not my primary motivation
True.
for being a writer. I became a writer because I felt a primal need to communicate, and I'm able to do that through my books, and no book has done that better than Nowhere Man. I mean, I've just heard from so many people all over the world who wanted, to talk about that book and invite me to come to places to talk about it. And like, I've gone to Chile, to Argentina, to Mexico, to Spain, to the UK. This is all because people want to talk about, Nowhere Man. And in some cases, they want to talk about the other books that, I would be happy to talk about, all my other books, the
Right,
book
right,
I'm
right.
currently working on. But Nowhere Man had just such a huge global impact that, like I say, 25 years later, this is the one that people want to keep talking about.
Well, let's get into that. I mean, I'm old enough. I'm approaching 60, so I definitely remember the Beatles, and then John Lennon, his assassination, and the whole thing with Yoko, and then his son. Um, Tell us, how did you get access to such a famous man?
Well, that I tell that story in chapter one of Nowhere Man. It's called John Lennon's Diaries. And, what happened was this guy, his name is Fred Seaman. Um, when I was the editor of that City College paper that I was talking about, Observation Post, he joined. We became we became friends. Um, he lived down the block from me. His family had a connection to John Lennon and Yoko Ono, and his first job at a college was he was hired by John and Yoko to be their PA, their personal assistant. And from his first day on the job, this was back in February 1979. Yeah, he said, we have to collaborate on a book. My family's been involved with them, for all these years since the early 1960s. His uncle had produced, Ono's performance pieces at Carnegie Hall,
Oh,
and
wow.
he got the job through his family. His aunt was Sean's governess, John's son with Yoko, and from his first day on the job, he was telling me, everything that was going on at the Dakota. He traveled with Lennon to like Bermuda and Florida, and he would just keep me up to date on what Lennon was doing, and I would take notes in my diary. And then he had the job for 2 years when John was murdered. And what Fred told me was that when he was in Bermuda with John that summer, the summer of 1980, when John was recording the demo tape for Double Fantasy, which was his last album that he released before he was killed. He said that John told him that he had a premonition of his death, and that if something should happen to him, it was Fred's job to tell the true story of his life and to use whatever material he felt necessary to tell that story. And what happened was, a couple of months after Lennon was killed, this was May 1981. We had begun working on the book soon afterwards. But in May 1981, Fred came to me with Lennon's diaries. And, these were the diaries that John wrote in virtually every day from like January 1975 to the day he was killed, December 8th, 1980. And, you know, these diaries were the key to the project. And I transcribed them. And over a period of time, I was able to transform the uh, the information in John's diaries into the book that became Nowhere Man. So
So
that's
was
how I had
John really
access.
into premonitions, dreams? Because you mentioned that he foresaw his own death. Was he into that kind of thing, or just was this a one off? Do you think?
No, no, he was very much, they had a full-time tarot card reader. They had a tarot card reader on.
Uh-oh.
Fortune tellers, and they were just very into all the occult practices,
Okay.
magic.
I did hear something about the whole Beatles being into the occult. I don't know if that was fact or fiction, but apparently it was fact, at least in regards to John. I don't know if that was the whole Beatles thing, or that this a John thing.
That you're saying that the Beatles were into occult practices?
No, well, I heard that. I didn't know if you had heard that in your studies, or was that just something that John did on his own?
Well, he didn't do it on his own. It was, Ono who was like
Oh,
really into the occult stuff, and
okay,
she got John into it. And like, they were into everything, numerology, tarot, astrology, on and on and on.
okay. What was the relationship between John and Ono, and then maybe John and McCarthy? Um,
Well, again, that's a big part of the book. And, John, no question, loved his wife very much. And, he was thrilled that she gave him a son, Sean. That was really John's dream, to have like a real family, and to he had neglected his first son, Julian, who he had her by his first wife. Her name was Cynthia, and he was born, when the Beatles were just catching fire, and he neglected them, and
so
he eventually.
wait. So Julian, the son that I knew when he started singing, that wasn't a product of John and Yoko.
Right, right. That was
Okay,
he was Cynthia's son, his
okay,
first wife,
that's
and then
interesting. Okay,
and then he married Yoko, and they had Sean, who was born in 1975. Julian was born in like what 1963, I think. Right before the Beatles really hit it, and he doted on Sean, and he neglected Julian, and towards the end of his life, he tried to repair that relationship, but yeah, it didn't really work out that way. That they had gotten closer in certain ways, but there was a lot of damage done to that relationship, and Sean was the apple of his eye, so to speak. So he had a wonderful relationship with Sean, and yeah, his relationship with Yoko was stormy. That Yoko never really forgave him for running off with May Pang, and he even after John got back together with Yoko after the so-called Lost Weekend in Los Angeles, that he would still sneak off to see May, and he was very frustrated with that. What John wanted was both. He wanted, Yoko for his wife and May for his mistress, and he just couldn't have that for the usual reasons that most people's
Yoko
wives
wanted to
are
have
not
that,
going to
huh?
permit that kind of thing. So that was an issue. As for Paul McCartney, again, this is a big part of Nowhere Man, and part of the reason why Nowhere Man has remained so popular for so many years, and that ultimately John was extremely jealous of McCartney. That when John was in his years of seclusion in the Dakota, after Sean was born, he dropped out of the music business for 5 years, and to some degree became a house husband and took some responsibility for bringing up Sean. So while John was doing all that, and just really being secluded and not talking to the press. McCartney was, always out there pumping out hit after hit after hit. And, this made Lennon jealous. And hardly a day passed when he wasn't thinking about McCartney and seeing his life as either, up or down in relation to McCartney. So when Yoko would do something like buy a beautiful mansion in Palm Beach, Lennon would write in his journals, a great victory over McCartney. When Yoko would sell one of her cows, a Holstein cow, for like $250,000, which was a huge amount of money for a cow in 1980. Again, he would, declare this a great victory over McCartney because, like, buying the house and selling the cow, this would, be written about in the papers. So it was like
Would it close before he went solo?
What, pardon me?
What they closed before he went solo?
Well, they were close when, they were with the Beatles because they were working together and, touring when the Beatles were still touring. But yeah, the relationship with the Beatles became strained, became strained, and the Beatles eventually broke up, and there were like all kinds of legal problems and headaches and lawsuits and, like, on and on like that, and it drove them apart.
Was it
And
ego driven or money driven?
both. I was what, ego and money driven. And yeah, I think, in my opinion, there's no question that Lennon and McCartney working together was a better songwriting combination than Lennon solo, or especially McCartney solo. And yeah, they just, Lennon didn't want to do that anymore. McCartney, well, as you can see, he's doing it. He's like, 80 something years old, and he's still, out there touring with his band. Yeah, McCartney wanted to reunite the Beatles. Lennon wanted no part of that.
Oh.
He saw the Beatles as like going backwards. He was like, 35, 40 years old, after he moved into, to the Dakota and had Sean. And, he saw the Beatles as going backwards, and he wanted to move forward. And, he didn't want to be the same person that he had been when he was like a teenager and the Beatles formed. So, he was really repulsed by the idea of a Beatles reunion. And, who knows, had Lennon lived, maybe they would have eventually done that. But, in 1980, it was really the last thing he wanted to do.
I find it interesting when you look at so many. I mean, look at the Rolling Stones, right? And you look at so many bands from back in the day reuniting, and John didn't want anything to do with it. It's an interesting train of thought there, where you have an opportunity to make more money. I'm quite sure John was wealthy, of course, because he might meant stuff like that, but still, you would think that he would want to do it just for the sake of reuniting and touring and in a different era, and reintroducing your music to a different population. It was just interesting that he wanted nothing to do with that.
Well, like I said, that he was sick of the music business. He was
Oh,
absolutely
okay.
thrilled when his contract with Capitol Records lapsed, and he
Oh,
was no longer, obligated to produce, music for a corporation. That, he was tired of the music business. He was burnt out on it. He was burnt out creatively. He really
okay. So
didn't
it
seem to
wasn't it
need.
wasn't, it wasn't the issue with the Beatles. He was through music in general. He just do with music. He didn't want to do with music anymore.
The music business.
Right, music business. Right. Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, even during the 5 years of seclusion, he still played his guitar, and he would like jot little notes for song ideas. But yeah, he felt too that, like I said, he was creatively burnt out and he needed to refresh himself. And that when he started, after the 5 year break, when he started writing the music for Double Fantasy, he felt like he'd reconnected with his muse, and like
Okay.
he was getting, these fresh ideas, and music was coming to him, and he was ready to perform again. And at the point he was killed, he was preparing to go out on tour for the first time since really the Beatles were touring. That he had played a couple of stray concerts in between the time that the Beatles broke up, and he went into seclusion. But he hadn't gone on tour. He was ready to go on tour to promote Double Fantasy.
Okay. Okay. Is anything that you could tell us about him and was it Hinckley? Was Hinckley his assassination? Oh, who's the gentleman who assassinated John?
Oh, the guy who assassinated
Yes,
John? Yeah, that was Mark David Chapman.
Chapman. Chapman. Was there any connection between them, or he was just a nut job?
Um, I am of the opinion, and this is based on what I've been observing for the past 40, guys, it's been 45 years since Lennon was killed, that I think that Chapman was a mentally ill person who believed he thought that by shooting John Lennon, that he would literally disappear into the pages of the J.D. Salinger book, The Catcher in the Rye, and he would write a new chapter of this book in Lennon's blood, and he would become the catcher in the rye for his generation. That is part of the insane reason that he killed Lennon.
Wow.
As you probably know, there have been a lot of conspiracy theories that have popped up about Mark David Chapman in the past 45 years
Sure.
since the murder. And they said he was programmed by the CIA, that he wasn't the actual gunman. There was a professional assassin who did the work, and he was actually a patsy, and this kind of thing. These theories have been circulating for 45 years, since the day that Chapman pulled the trigger, and all that time, nothing has come of them. That people keep expounding on these theories, and they go nowhere.
Mm.
And I don't believe I have been implicated in some of these
You?
theories. Yeah, yeah, me. That there are books that say, well, they say various things. One conspiracy theorist said I was a CIA spy master who gave the order to kill Lennon. Other people
A
think
spy
I
master.
was, yeah, it's crazy. It's insane. Uh, Others say I was like a CIA archivist who did something else, and some people think I was the actual gunman. And like I've been seeing this stuff, since like 2000. And the first time I saw it, I said, this is insane. This is crazy. It really shocked me. It upset my wife more than it
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
upset me that people are accusing me of murder. These people who never met me,
Right.
never spoke to me, and at this point, I just ignore it. A few months ago, I got into a debate with the latest conspiracy theorist who believed that Chapman was a CIA patsy, and that that there was actually a professional assassin who shot Lennon. I went back on one of the things I said I should never do. That, well, because of the Brooklyn book, which talks about Nazis and the way Holocaust survivors reacted to Nazis, that there are people who in the past have wanted to debate me about the Holocaust. Did the Holocaust really happen? And I have just always refused to debate people like that because, the Holocaust really happened and there's nothing to debate. In the latest case, I made a mistake of debating this conspiracy theorist who, who believed that a professional assassin killed Lennon and Chapman was just a CIA patsy.
Explain to us, was John that important?
Was John, uh, the theory is that with Ronald Reagan coming into power, he had just won the election over Jimmy Carter in and he was going to be president, inaugurated in I guess what, January 1981. And these people think that Lenin would have been able to motivate and galvanize, anti-Reagan people. And, one of the conspiracy theorists said that I was killed, that I had Lenin killed because uh, the Star Wars, anti-missile system was, Reagan wanted to do this, and Lenin was somehow going to disrupt the Star Wars anti-missile system that was going to defend the United States against
Wow.
nuclear war. And
I don't
again,
remember Lennon being that political, not that political. I mean, the Beatles, you could say, were kind of, political in the sense, but not to that severity.
yeah, the Beatles, were anti-war, anti anti-segregation, things like that. They were for
Yeah,
peace.
yeah.
And but no, I mean, I think it's crazy that these conspiracy theorists think that Lenin was that powerful and he could have somehow disrupted the Reagan administration and turned people against Reagan, and just kind of led this this anti-Reagan force. And the last 5 years when he was in seclusion, before that, it's true, he was hanging around with people like Jerry Rubin, and he was organizing anti-war rallies, or not organizing them but participating in them. And he was calling for political prisoners to be freed, people in jail for marijuana to be freed, and he wrote songs about it. But in the last 5 years in seclusion, he had become completely
Right.
apolitical. There was like barely a word about politics in his diary. It seemed like the only political thought he had in his diaries, he wrote that somebody was going to assassinate Reagan and we were going to get George Bush and we'd have the CIA presidency. That was pretty close to being a prophecy because,
That's pretty interesting.
somebody did shoot Reagan and almost killed him. You know,
Right.
John Hinckley, who's out of jail now and is recording music.
Oh, is he?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You could, go on the internet and find, John Hinckley and his recording career and
Is he
buy one of
good?
his albums if you're into it. Which,
I don't think so. I don't think so.
yeah, I didn't think, yeah, you don't look like the kind of guy who's into Hinckley's music. Yeah, and neither am I.
So tell people about you in regards to the Brooklyn Memoirs, because this is basically about you, correct?
Yeah, it's a memoir. I was born in 1952. My father was a World War II veteran. He fought the Nazis all through Europe. He liberated a concentration camp, and for whatever reason, the neighborhood I grew up in, Flatbush, at that time, was a lot of Holocaust survivors moved to Flatbush. And I don't know why that happened, but it happened. And when I was like 4 years old, this is the first time I really became aware of it. I was standing in a bakery with my mother. This was like 1956. And I'm looking at the woman behind the counter at the bakery, and she's like putting a cake into a box, a chocolate cake. And I see on her inner forearm, there's these numbers. And I say, Mom, what are those numbers on the lady's forearm? And she says, she was in Auschwitz. Everybody in Auschwitz, the Nazis gave them a number on their forearm. And yeah, like I say, I was 4 years old. I had seen stuff about the concentration camps on TV because, it was still relatively new. And, my mother would talk. My father never talked about the war, but my mother talked about it. And, she would tell me things about, the Nazis and, Adolf Eichmann and, Hitler and Mengele and all these, Nazi war criminals. And, after I learned about the numbers on the woman's arm, I would walk around and all of a sudden I started seeing them everywhere. It's like
Mm.
all these people in Flatbush, they had the numbers on their arms. They were all in concentration camps. And what I say in the book is that psychologically, for all these people, all the World War II veterans, all the Holocaust survivors, that World War II never ended for them, that the war hung over Flatbush like a mass hallucination. And a day would not go by when you didn't hear somebody, talking about the war. And, there was the super of my building was German, and he had a heavy German accent, and he had a couple of kids who were like, our age, and every time we saw these kids, oh, there's the Nazis, and we beat the shit out of these kids for no reason other than their father was German. I mean, they were probably refugees, but
So
just like it,
how are the new immigrants, Jewish immigrants, how are they received in Flatbush? Because I can imagine that some people felt a kind of way like they've been invaded. The people come from nowhere just because, and now they got jobs, they got businesses. Like how were they received? Was it a kind of prejudice or racism or anything targeted against them for being Jew for one thing, and just being invaders for another?
well, for one thing, Flatbush was a predominantly Jewish neighborhood,
Or was
which is
okay.
why they moved there. It was nearly 100% white. There, and I grew up in an atmosphere of extreme racial prejudice. That there's this famous photo of this was, let's see, October probably 1964, right before the election. This was after Kennedy had been assassinated, and Lyndon Johnson and Bobby Kennedy came to Flatbush to campaign. Bobby Kennedy, not the current Bobby Kennedy,
Right,
who's right, his father, who
right.
was assassinated too.
Mm.
Uh, they came to Flatbush to campaign. Kennedy was running for senator, and Johnson was running for president. And they came down like the main commercial street in 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 Flatbush, Church Avenue. They went like right past my father's candy store, and there's this picture where you see Kennedy and Johnson in an open limousine, which was amazing. Only a couple of less than 1 year after Dallas,
Mm.
and on both sides of the street and in the street there's a massive crowd, and thousands of people, and you can you look at the crowd, and every single face is white. There was not one black or brown face in that entire crowd. Flatbush was almost a 100% segregated neighborhood. That in my public school, there were two black kids. They were, they were brothers. They were like the only two black kids in the school. We did not come in contact with people for the most part. We did not come in contact with people
That was
who
done
weren't.
purposely?
What?
That was done purposely?
Uh, I don't see how it could have been done accidentally. That I'm sure the neighborhood was redlined, and there were just there were no minority people there except for like the smallest handful. And the thing about the Holocaust survivors and the people who fled Europe, they were incredibly prejudiced against people outside the tribe. And this is the atmosphere I grew up in, and I didn't know that there was another way to be. The N word was just like, used routinely. I think, that what was going on in Flatbush was as bad as, anything that was going on in the Deep South that you just, didn't hear about it really. And, eventually it changed that by the time my parents moved out of Flatbush in the late 1970s, that the neighborhood had become it become it had become a huge Haitian neighborhood, and it just changed completely. It went from predominantly Jewish. I mean, I don't know what the percentage was, but like virtually everybody I knew was Jewish, and there were Italians and Irish, but it was still predominantly Jewish, and the well, the World War II veterans who fought the Nazis and the Holocaust survivors, they just, hated anybody outside the tribe. And, I just, grew up hearing every
How did that affect you?
derogatory, what?
How did that affect you?
Uh, I didn't really think about it
I mean,
because,
as you grew up and you became illuminated, how did that
yeah,
affect you?
how did it affect you that, my God, this is wrong. I don't want to be like this. This is, and, there are other ways to be. And I ended up going to college at City College, which is in the middle of Harlem. And, yeah, it was
It's a
like
culture shock, huh?
really, pardon me?
It's a culture shock, huh?
Yeah, it was a bit of a culture shock, and I just, you know, I was exposed, to people who weren't like this, and it was just, wow, there's a whole nother way to be, and this is the way I should be. And it was like, it was something that had to be overcome because it was just so deeply ingrained in me for so many, in my formative years. You just hear this shit every day and you don't really think about it that, this is the way people talk. I'm going to use that word. Everybody uses that
Right,
word.
right.
Why shouldn't I use it?
So when
And
you were introduced to somebody like me at in college, how did you react? Were you have been considered a racist just based on what you knew of the world at that time? Or how did you react? Did you react openly, brotherly, or was it like how you conditioned?
well, it was something to overcome. I think I reacted openly that I was on the newspaper at City College, and for whatever reason, the newspaper community, there were a lot of student newspapers. There was the radical student newspaper OP, the one that I was on, and I'm writing about now. The staff was probably 98% white and Jewish. The black students had their own newspaper. It was called The Paper. And, that's what they wanted. That, like, occasionally a black person would join OP, but, they had their own, their own newspaper to, express what they wanted to express. and we expressed what we wanted to express, and it's not like we fought with them. It was just, they had their own world. We had
Two
their own
different
world.
worlds.
That was the way they wanted it.
Right.
They wanted
Right.
to maintain that segregation. But of course, in class, it wasn't like that. There were plenty of black people in my class, and they were just like, everybody else. And um, yeah, that they weren't like more smarter than we were or less smart. They functioned as students just
Mhm.
as we functioned as students. But still, it was a lot to overcome because it was just so pounded into my head. And yeah, my father died quite a few years ago now, like almost 20 years ago. But you know, he started to, in his later years, he mellowed a bit and he stopped using the N word finally. And yeah, but he was just, yeah, he was a dyed in the wool racist
And
for
your
a long
mother?
time. My mother was, she did not use the N word. That was the difference between them.
Okay.
And, my father was a law and order Republican who, voted for Nixon. He actually ran on the Republican ticket for the mayor of Spring Valley, which was this, little town that they moved to after they left, after they left Brooklyn. And my mother's, still alive. She's, 98 years old. And
Congratulations.
yeah, congratulations to her. Hopefully, I got some of those genes. Um, but my father and my mother's brother, my uncle, yeah, they would just like sit around and they'd go with that racist shit in like an
Wow.
unbelievable way, and it was just like I would walk out of the room. I don't want to hear this. Stop it. What's wrong with you people?
Wow.
And yeah, I consider myself an egalitarian. Yeah, I have friends whose skin is not the same color as mine, and yeah, it's just I overcame it. I'm glad I overcame it. But in a Brooklyn memoir, what I did, I captured a visceral sense of what it was like to grow up in that kind of hatred and that kind of atmosphere. And I point out too in like the afterword of the book that Donald Trump grew up not that far away
I heard that.
from where I grew up, and he was marinated in that same racist bullshit. And not only did he not overcome it, but he learned how to exploit it.
Is that how you see it?
What Trump is doing?
Yeah, that he's exploiting the fact that his father was a racist.
Yes, I think he understood the kind of the kind of racism that was lurking just below the surface, that had been repressed for a long, long time. And yes, he was, able to exploit the hatred, not only of black people, but of, minorities of all kinds. And he was able to exploit that hatred and ride it to the presidency the first time.
That's interesting. I never saw it that way because I haven't heard anyone speak illy of him being a racist. There have
You
been
haven't?
many reports and many interviews of people of different colors praising his kindness. Um, and true, his father, of course, was a racist, a Klansman, but I haven't heard anyone say that he was a racist.
I think he's a white supremacist, and the people, who he's put into his cabinet, are white supremacists too. I mean, like this whole thing with what happened, good people on both sides or bad people on both sides. That yeah. I I don't think anything would ever convince me that Donald Trump is not a racist, and that his great skill is dividing people, and there's good people and there's bad people. And, these days the only good people are people who are loyal to Donald Trump, and not the Constitution, but loyal to Donald
Well, yeah,
Trump.
of course. I mean, that's the one true thing you said. I mean, and somebody could see that as a positive. Some people see it as a negative. I mean, loyalty is important. He might take it to the extreme in many cases, and that's could be one's opinion. I could say he take it to the extreme. He has very thin skin. But outside of that, I mean, again, I haven't heard anyone black or Hispanic come forward to say, yeah, he literally burnt a cross in my yard, something like that. I mean, people have had opinions of him, but I haven't seen evidence of that. I mean, because he's had blacks in his cabinet. Like I said, he has had blacks come and speak on his behalf very generously. And I don't know. I mean, I hear these stories about that, and I saw the picture of him as a father, but he he don't have to be punished for his father's sins no more than you do. It's how I look at it.
Well,
Until somebody say and show me proof that this is what he did to me as a person of an ethnic minority,
well,
I don't know.
how about let's go back to the 1980s when he called for the execution of the Central Park Five. You know about that, right?
Yeah,
That, yeah, that they're all black and Hispanic, and
yeah,
he called for their execution, and they turned out to be innocent.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was pretty. The first time Donald Trump came to the to national attention was when he was sued. He was in the real estate business with his father, and they didn't rent to black people, and he was sued for that. And I think it was settled out of court, but it's just like it's like these one incident after another, all through the years, like when he's talking about shithole countries, what countries do you think he's talking about? He's not talking about Sweden and Norway.
Right. I mean, again, a lot of this I think we're taking out of context. One, he's New York, and two, he was New York is very liberal, and two, three, blacks do have issues that are not economically what a person would want to invest in. That's just economics. I'm a black person, and if you ever listen in my podcast, I recognize that we got issues. We got issues in regards to how we carry ourselves who want to be a target of investment. That's our issue. And as if I was on the economic side, wanting to invest in an area for blacks, I would think not twice, but four times before I do it. That doesn't make me a racist. That makes me a businessman.
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
so I'm just saying, there's something I mean, I'm not saying he's not a racist. I just said I haven't seen any proof of it. Is he human? Does he make mistakes? Yes, we all do. But I could look at Biden and his history, and I can look at Obama and his history. But this is not what we're here to talk about. But I'm just saying, I keep hearing these things about Trump, and no one has came forth after all this time, all these years, to bring a smoking gun that this person was directly offended and impacted negatively because of his skin by Donald Trump directly.
Well, impacted directly. Well, I read about again, the tapes have not been released, but there's been all this talk about when he was filming The Apprentice that he would use the N-word routinely. Um,
A lot of whites do, but that'll make him racist. And again, he was in New York. You're a New Yorker. A lot of whites use the N word. A lot of whites use the N word now. a little bit too comfortable with it. I agree, but blacks use the N-word. I don't agree with anyone using the N-word. You can't say it's okay to say N-word on one person and then crucify somebody for saying the N-word on them. It's mentally dysfunctional. Again, I'm not trying to defend Trump. I'm just saying that people are taking this out of context and they're giving passes to anyone who has a D in front of their name. If we could be equally just, we all be equally just against across the board and call everything out equally. If one person did wrong, other person did wrong, they both did wrong.
Well, yeah, I wish you were right about Donald Trump. Not only do I think he's a racist, I think he's an anti-Semite, even though his daughter married a Jewish guy. That I've heard too many of his subtly anti-Semitic cracks, and I just don't think that what Trump is doing, whatever he is, that I think he's a bigoted man in many, many ways. I don't think what he's doing is good for the country. I think that if we survive another 4 years of Donald Trump, things are going to be a lot worse economically and in other ways too than they are now. I mean, why is he, tearing up these Black Lives Matter, memorials on like the streets of Washington? That just happened the other day. Why are they taking like all these references to black soldiers out of the Pentagon files? That they're just trying to erase all these references to the accomplishments of blacks and other minorities.
Well, I haven't heard about the Pentagon Papers. I haven't heard about that.
Well, Google it and you'll see, like, it's not only blacks, it's like gay people too. One of the craziest things they did, they had artificial intelligence, going through all these Pentagon files to remove stuff that was considered DEI. One of the things they took out is the Enola Gay because of the word gay. The Enola Gay is the airplane that dropped the A-bomb on Hiroshima.
Well, I mean, it's something. I mean, in regards to the whole Elon Musk, not his creation, because the infrastructure was already there, put in by Obama. But I mean, those things he has overshot. I must agree, he has overshot, and anything to do with DEI, everything. With DEI doesn't have to necessarily be bad, and if you're trying to do everything with a broad brush, you're gonna hit some collateral damage, and hopefully he correct those things once he recognized his error.
I hope you're right.
Yeah, I mean he should. I mean, not only gay because this guy have gay in it, but again, we are in a fallen world. So to expect men in general to act Christianly in a post-Christian world, you're always going to be disappointed. I don't think Trump walks on water. I'm a Republican myself. I would never be a Democrat based on the Democratic history. And if you looked at my videos, listened to my podcast, you understand why.
I have listened to some of your podcasts.
It's just me. But I mean, at the end of the day, we are going to be judged by one Father. And at that point, everything will come to the surface. And that's the way I live my life in regards to that. I wish everybody will be equally kind to everybody and be truthfully honest about people's actions as to do their history before they espouse harshly or strongly worded opinions. We always be better off. I'm not saying I'm right. I could be wrong. That's why we're having a conversation, to have everything come out. And I think
conversations are good. Democrats.
That's the best thing to do.
I'm a Democrat. I live in New York. Always been a Democrat. But no, it's good that we could have a civil conversation like this.
Exactly.
But you just brought up Elon Musk. I mean, talk about racism. I mean, the guy can't, comes from apartheid South Africa.
But a white person come from South Africa don't necessarily be a racist. I mean, I don't know Elon. I know a lot of white people come from areas that I may question that turn to be very good. I know a lot of good atheists who save my butt in many cases. So I treat each person individually and wait till I see the whites of his eyes and the content of what he does before I make a judgment on that individual. Because some people could say whites from the South are racist, but I know a lot of whites in the South will save my bacon a lot quicker than any black in the South. So I look at each individual as an individual, and I don't judge them until I have a conversation with them.
Yeah, well, that's the way things should be, but a lot of people prefer not to do that, and they
Yeah, I
go
know.
by their prejudices, and they paint everything with a broad brush.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Or they at least listen to somebody else say, and I was saying, a bad idea supported by 100 people is 100 people with a bad idea. Just because the majority of people now in the paper to say something about somebody, and now it becomes popular. Now the popular is the truth. No longer is it an issue, is it the truth or not? It's more of an issue, is it popular? And that's where we are running into so much difficulty when it comes to the truth and what is fake news and what's real news, because now we don't want to read, we don't want to do our own objective discoveries. We will go with the popular word is on the street about something or something, which is totally wrong, and you will never get the real truth if you're going by what is popular.
I agree with that. And it gets harder and harder to figure out what's going on, because there's like so much misinformation, disinformation out there. I
Right,
mean, I read the New York Times every day with like many grains of salt. It's just like some of that leaves
right,
me.
right.
What are they trying to say here? This doesn't quite sound right.
There you
Something's
go.
missing.
And one more thing about Trump, you're from New York, he's from New York. Before he turned Republican, blacks loved him.
Before he turned
From
Republican,
Oprah
he was
Winfrey to anybody.
a
And,
Democrat.
huh?
Before he turned Republican, he was a
Yeah,
Democrat.
yeah. So when did he turn out to be the devil reincarnated? Was it before he turned Republican or after he turned Republican? I mean, if he was a bad guy against blacks, I'm quite sure Oprah did some research on this guy. I'm quite sure Al Sharpton did some research on this guy. So my point is, when is the truth about Trump? Is it before he became Republican or after he became Republican?
I think the truth about Trump is you have to go back to the very beginning, the thing that I was just talking about before, when he was, working with his father at first in the real estate business.
Right,
And that lawsuit happened when it was proven that they would not rent to black people.
right. But we already agreed that his father was a racist. So if he was still working up under his father, then we gotta look at his father, not necessarily Trump. I don't know this story. You're more familiar with it, but it sounds like he was working under his father. And if that's the case, then you look at that more so than Trump. And also, he's a businessman. I probably one went to blacks in New York just because of economics.
Well, like you just said, you got to take it, individual
Yeah,
cases.
yeah,
I mean, there's a black middle class in New York for sure.
yeah,
And it's just, it's New York. Well, I don't know, there's some pretty white neighborhoods, but, New York is a well integrated city, though, there certainly are, enclaves of blacks and whites.
yeah,
And
yeah. And there's some areas that if you was a businessman looking for an investment, you want to invest in, whether it be black or white, just based on the numbers.
okay, you take, each person individually,
Yeah,
you run their name, you're renting to somebody, you run their numbers through the credit agencies, and you see what's going on. And, if they have good credit, you rent to them.
good. Right, right, right. Well, we got way off of something, but hey, I'm always. That's why I say I like flowing, and I think we've learned a little bit more about each other. I think my listeners and your listeners will also. It's very interesting. I guess just learning about not only about Lennon and your take on his life and afterlife, but also your book about how things were back in New York back then. Very eye opening. Me not being from New York, I didn't know the history of Flatbush. All I remember of this movie Flatbush with Sylvester. I think Sylvester Stallone was in
Oh,
it.
the Lords of Flatbush.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
That's
that was somebody's fantasy.
that's what I said when you mentioned that it was mostly Jew. I'm like, I remember Jews in the movie. So that's how I was taking off. I like, oh, there were Jews in Flatbush. So yeah, so we definitely learned something about you. But tell people how they keep in contact with you, how they go follow you, how they can reach out to you.
The best way, well, I'm on all this, well, not all this social media. You could find me on Facebook. You could find me on Threads. Um, that the best way, if you want to contact me, learn about my books, the best thing to do is go to my website, which is robertrosennyc.com. And, you could write to me. I love to hear from people who've read any of my books. And, if you want me to come on your podcast or, you want to interview me for something, just write to me through my website, and I'm just always happy to hear from people, and I'm responsive. So I look forward to hearing from anybody who might be listening to this.
Excellent. Definitely appreciate your time, Robert, and definitely reach out to me for any reason. Definitely, I'm here to learn more about you. If you want to come back on and talk about your most recent escapades, definitely am open to that as well.
Yeah, my most recent escapades is I'm barely sitting in a room, essentially sitting in a room, writing a new book, and I air myself out every day and take a walk.
Excellent. Well, you be blessed. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, it's been a pleasure. Take care.
You too.
Thanks for listening to today's show. And don't forget to like and subscribe to this podcast. And look for Project Third Eye Open on your favorite social media platforms. Check out our webpage at projectthirdeyeopen.com. And that's third eye with the letter I. projectthirdeyeopen.com. Or drop us a note at TonyEL@projectthirdeyeopen.com. That's TonyEL@projectthirdeyeopen.com. As you wait for our next podcast to drop, don't take anything we've said as fact. Instead, do your own homework, make up your own mind, then take action. Until next time, be blessed, be good, and be free.